I set the table for 3. Not because I believed they'd come, but because I couldn't face the silence if I didn't. My name is Mary Dalton. I'm 72 years old. I live in a white house with green shutters at the end of Cedar Street in Bend, Oregon. And this past Christmas was the first one I spent without my husband, John. He passed in March. A quiet man with big hands and a bad cough. 51 years of marriage, and just like that, I was a widow with a pantry full of spices he liked and no one to use them for. That morning, December 24th, it was raining hard. Not the pretty kind, either. Cold rain, sideways, tapping the kitchen window like it had something to say. I was standing at the sink, rinsing a plate I hadn't used in months, when I saw my reflection in the window, gray roots peeking through, the red sweater loose on my shoulders. And for a second, I didn't recognize myself. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands slowly. The radio was on in the background, crackling old jazz, Miles Davis, I think. I don't usually notice the music. But that morning, every sound felt louder. The hum of the fridge. The ticking clock above the pantry. The creak in the floorboard when I stepped away from the counter. The house has never been this quiet. Not even during storms. Not even when John was in the hospital. Back then, at least, I still had hope. I still made 2 cups of coffee. I still laid out his slippers like he'd come walking in. Now, I walk past that same hook where his flannel robe still hangs. Haven't taken it down. I don't know why. That day, I did something I hadn't done in almost a year. I opened the linen cabinet and pulled out the good tablecloth. The one with the little pinecone embroidery on the edges. I laid it across the dining table and smoothed it out with both hands. Then I opened the china cabinet. That was when I made the decision. Dinner. 3 plates. 1 for me. 1 for David. 1 for Olivia. My son and his wife. I didn't plan anything fancy. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I just didn't want to sit alone with a microwave dinner and the 5 o'clock news. I told myself, keep it simple, Mary. Just them. Just family. I texted David 2 nights before. Come by Christmas Day. I'll have dinner ready by 3. He replied with a thumbs up emoji. That's all. I should have known. Maybe I did. Maybe deep down, I felt it coming. But when you're lonely, even the smallest gesture feels like a promise. And a promise feels like love. So I got up early Christmas morning. Made coffee in the same percolator we've had since '78. Burnt the first batch of bacon like always. I wore the dress John loved. Dark red with pearl buttons and a tiny tear near the hem that I never fixed. I put on lipstick. Just a little. My hands shook, but I managed. By noon, the ham was glazed and resting. I'd boiled the potatoes twice, mashed them with sour cream like David used to ask for in high school. Green bean casserole in the oven. Pecan pie cooling on the counter. And rolls wrapped in foil, ready to be warmed. The house smelled right. That's the only way I can describe it. Butter, sugar, rosemary, heat. Like home used to feel. And then I saw it. A shadow moved past the front window. My heart jumped. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked fast, too fast, for a woman my age. I pulled the curtain back and, nothing. Just the mail truck turning at the corner. No car in the driveway. No one at the door. That's when it started. That buzz in my chest. Like something wasn't quite clicking. I stood there longer than I should have. watching the rain drip off the porch roof. Then I heard the ding from my phone. A new text. My hands shook as I picked it up. It wasn't from David. It was a pharmacy reminder. That moment broke something in me. Just a little. Just enough. I sat down at the table I'd set with my mother's china. 3 plates. Forks lined straight. Napkins folded with the silver ring holders John made in his workshop 30 years ago. I stared at those settings like they might blink. The candles flickered even though the windows were shut. I looked around. Everything was perfect. And I felt like a woman who had built a life around being needed, and had just realized no one needed her anymore. But I didn't blow out the candles. I didn't pack up the food. I just sat there. And I asked myself a question I never thought I'd have to ask at 72. What do you do when the people you love most stop choosing you, quietly, but completely? I started cooking the day before. Not reheating. Not opening a box and stirring until it looked like something. I mean really cooking. Flour on the counter, oven hot by 10 a.m., music playing low on the radio, Billie Holiday, scratchy and soft, the way John liked it. I made a list on a yellow notepad. Not because I needed it. I've known these recipes by heart for decades. But writing them down felt like a ritual. Like saying, yes, this matters. Yes, someone is coming. I began with the cornbread for the stuffing. John used to call it the real main dish. Said ham was just a distraction. I let it bake slow, edges crisping just right, the middle still soft when I poked it with a fork. I set it on the cooling rack next to the window. The smell made the kitchen feel smaller somehow. Fuller. After that, I started the pie. Pecan. I don't even like pecan pie, to tell the truth. But David does. Or he used to. I cracked the eggs carefully, mixed the sugar and corn syrup, stirred in the vanilla. The dough gave me trouble. It always does when I'm nervous. I had to redo it twice. Hands shaking. Butter too cold. Then too soft. I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. The fridge was already full by noon. Sweet tea in a pitcher, rolls wrapped in a towel, green bean casserole resting under foil. Everything labeled, stacked, ready. I was moving fast but not rushed. It was the kind of pace you fall into when you want something to be just so. By late afternoon, I lit a cinnamon candle and placed it on the windowsill above the sink. The sun was dipping low and the light turned everything gold. It hit the edge of the stove and glinted off the old tea kettle. I remember thinking, John would have liked this light. I set the table next. I took out the good plates, the ones with the faded gold rim. Not because they're fancy. They're not. They just remind me of years when the house was loud. Thanksgiving with kids running underfoot, Christmas Eve with jazz and laughter and the smell of chocolate pie in the air. I folded the napkins into triangles. Tucked forks neatly to the side. I even found the tiny ceramic snowman salt shaker that David made in 2nd grade. The paint's chipped. His little red hat's half gone. But I set it right in the middle. I didn't cry. I poured myself a glass of water and stood in the doorway, looking at everything. The table. The candles. The rolls rising on the stovetop. And I felt, not happy, not sad. Something in between. Like standing in the doorway of a memory you're still trying to keep warm. The next morning, I woke up early. Before sunrise. Couldn't sleep. I made coffee and drank it slowly on the back porch, wrapped in John's flannel robe. The backyard was quiet. Just the sound of a neighbor's wind chime and the occasional bird rustling in the holly bush. By 8, I was in the kitchen again. The ham went in first. Glazed with brown sugar and pineapple rings. The kind with the toothpick sticking out. Old-fashioned, maybe. But that's how John liked it. I basted it every 30 minutes, letting the juices sizzle and coat the edges. Next came the mashed potatoes. I peeled them one by one, careful not to waste a bit. Boiled them until they split at the edges. Then I whipped them with sour cream and butter, added a splash of milk, tasted, adjusted, tasted again. They were smooth. Creamy. The way David always asked for. I didn't sit down all day. I moved from counter to oven to sink to fridge like someone who believed every detail still mattered. I set out extra butter. Filled the bread basket. Cut the pie into neat slices, even though I knew I wouldn't eat any. Around 2:30, I fixed my hair. Pulled it back in a clip. Dabbed on a little powder. Red lipstick, soft at the corners. I put on the red dress. The one with the pearl buttons. John always said it made me look like I still had secrets. I looked in the mirror and tried to see what he saw. By 2:45, I lit the candles. 3 white tapers in the center of the table, flickering gently in the afternoon light. I lowered the volume on the radio. Bing Crosby singing, "I'll Be Home for Christmas." I turned on the lamp in the hallway, adjusted the throw on the couch, and checked my phone. Nothing. At exactly 3 o'clock, I stood by the window and waited. I imagined the sound of tires crunching the gravel. I pictured David stepping out, brushing his hair back the way he does when he's nervous. I pictured Olivia, always cold, wrapped in one of those long scarves that drag on the ground. But the driveway stayed empty. The candles burned a little lower. I walked back to the table and sat at the edge of my chair. Not fully seated. Just perched, like I might jump up any second. I looked at the place settings. The little snowman. The rolls, now cooling in their basket. The ham, resting on the stove. I reached for my phone again. Still nothing. And that's when the question landed in my chest, heavier than anything I'd felt all week. A question I had tried to keep buried beneath recipes and polish and perfectly folded napkins. What if the table looks full, only because I refuse to admit it's already empty? The whole house smelled like love was coming home. But love, I'd learn, takes detours. By 3:15, the mashed potatoes were starting to dry at the edges. I stirred them once. Then again. Added a splash of milk. It didn't help. The rolls had cooled too. I wrapped them back in the towel and slid them into the oven on low, just to keep them soft. The tea was already in the fridge. I didn't want to open it again and let out the cold. I stood there, arms crossed, watching the timer tick down for no reason at all. I checked my phone. Again. Nothing. Just that same empty lock screen, no notifications, no, on our way. I told myself maybe traffic was bad. Or maybe Olivia took too long getting dressed. She always did like to try on 3 outfits before settling. Or maybe they were driving and just forgot to text. People forget. Things happen. But even as I made excuses, something in me went quiet. Not sad. Not angry. Just quiet, like my chest didn't want to make room for disappointment again. At 3:30, I lowered the music. Bing had been singing for too long anyway. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain back. Same empty street. The rain had stopped, but the sky looked pale and dull. The kind of light that makes everything feel unfinished. I stood there for a while. Then, at 3:45, the doorbell rang. My heart kicked like it used to when I'd hear John's car pull into the driveway. I smoothed my dress, brushed my hands through my hair, and hurried to the front door. But it wasn't them. It was a young man in a windbreaker, holding a manila envelope. He didn't smile. Just looked down at the address and said, "Delivery for Mary Dalton?" "Yes," I answered, confused. He handed it to me, turned, and walked back to his car. That was it. No clipboard. No explanation. I closed the door slowly, the envelope still in my hand. The porch light clicked on behind me, even though it was barely past 4. Motion sensor. I always forget about it until it startles me. Back inside, the kitchen still smelled of sugar and sage. The candles flickered. One had burned down so far it was dripping onto the cloth. I moved it aside. I stared at the envelope. It had a small gold sticker sealing the flap. The kind Olivia uses for Christmas cards. Neat handwriting on the front. Curvy, pretty. Always a little too perfect. I opened it. Inside was a single folded note. No card. No photos. Just a few lines written in Olivia's careful script. "Mary. We're so sorry. We decided to spend Christmas at my mom's this year. It was a last-minute change. We hope you understand. Love. Olivia." No, let's reschedule. No, we miss you. No explanation. No apology. Just a decision. Wrapped up in soft words like a gift I hadn't asked for. I sat down at the kitchen table, the one I had set 3 hours ago. The plates still gleamed. The snowman salt shaker stared back at me. The pie on the counter, untouched, the crust still warm. I read the note again, slower this time, hoping I missed something. A clue. A wink. A hint that this wasn't as hollow as it felt. But it was. They hadn't forgotten. They had chosen not to come. I looked at the food. Every bite had a memory attached. The ham John always carved. The casserole I remade after burning it once in '93. The potatoes David used to sneak a spoonful of before dinner, laughing like he'd gotten away with something. I had made all of it for them. And they'd made other plans. Not even with notice. Not even with kindness. Just a courier. The fork in front of me caught the candlelight and glinted. I picked it up. Put it down. My hands were starting to shake. I walked to the counter and poured a glass of tea. Not because I was thirsty. Because I didn't know what else to do. I brought it back to the table, sat down at the head, and tried to swallow. Nothing went down. My throat had other plans. I stared across the table at the 2 empty plates. Olivia's napkin was folded into a triangle. David's glass was already sweating. I'd filled it early, out of habit. I had been waiting for something that was never going to happen. The music had stopped by then. The radio gone quiet. All I could hear was the hum of the fridge and the soft pop of the oven turning itself off. I stood, walked to the counter, and covered the pie. I wrapped each dish carefully. Plastic lids snapping in place. Every movement slow, mechanical. I didn't want to look at the food in the morning. The tablecloth had a small stain from the cranberry sauce. I scrubbed it with a damp cloth, even though it was barely noticeable. I blew out the candles. The house dimmed fast. As if it had been pretending to, waiting for something it knew would never come. I left the envelope on the table. I didn't tear it. Didn't crumple it. Just left it there, like evidence of something I still didn't want to name. I turned on the lamp by the couch and stood there for a while, staring at the doorway. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a late knock. Maybe a call. It never came. And that's when it hit me. Harder than the silence. Harder than the pie no one touched. The table was full, but I had never felt more unseen. I didn't mean to look. It was almost 8 by the time I sat down in the living room. I had changed into my soft flannel pajamas. The red ones with little pine trees that John always said made me look like I was ready for a Hallmark movie marathon. My hair was pinned up loosely, and the lipstick had long since faded. The tree lights were still glowing. I hadn't turned them off yet. I didn't want to. Something about their quiet twinkle made the house feel less hollow. I curled up on the corner of the couch with a blanket and reached for my tablet. Not because I wanted to scroll. I didn't want anything, really. But still, my fingers opened the Facebook app like they always do, out of habit. Or maybe hope. The first thing I saw was a photo. A long table. White tablecloth. Crystal glasses. Candles lit. Plates half empty. And there, in the middle of it all, was David. My son. Sitting beside Olivia, his hand on hers, both of them smiling wide. I stared at the screen. For a moment, I didn't move. Didn't blink. Just sat there, watching it like it was a stranger's family. But it wasn't. It was mine. Or at least, it used to be. There was another photo right after it. A wide shot of the whole room. Olivia's mother standing behind the table, her arms stretched in a toast. A caption underneath, "So grateful for a house full of love this Christmas." I zoomed in. David was laughing. His tie was crooked, like he'd rushed to get dressed but still wanted to look nice. Olivia wore a green sweater with sequins along the collar. Her hair was pulled into a perfect bun. They looked content. Not distracted. Not apologetic. Not like people who had just sent a note to cancel on someone they were supposed to care about. I pulled the blanket tighter around me. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the fridge and the occasional pop from the fireplace as the last embers died down. My plate from dinner still sat in the sink. Untouched. I didn't even remember putting it there. I tapped the screen again. Another picture. This one closer. Olivia was leaning toward her niece, feeding her something off her plate, laughing. And in the background, just barely, I saw it. A framed photo on a shelf. It was from David and Olivia's wedding. All of us. I was wearing blue. John had his arm around my shoulders. David stood tall in his suit. Olivia in lace. They had cropped me out of the version they posted last year. But not here. In Olivia's mother's house, the full version still sat on display. Like some relic they didn't bother moving. I set the tablet down gently on the coffee table. My hands were shaking. Not from anger. Not yet. From something quieter. Heavier. I leaned back on the couch and stared up at the ceiling. All these years, I told myself it was okay. That they were just busy. That newlyweds have to split time. That maybe next year would be different. But this wasn't about time. It wasn't even about forgetting. This was about choosing. And they hadn't chosen me. I thought back to Christmases past. When David was little, he'd wake up before the sun, run down the hallway in footy pajamas, eyes wide at the stockings. John would still be half asleep, his hair a mess, but he'd smile and grab the camera anyway. I used to make cinnamon rolls. Always burnt the edges. David never cared. He said the middle was the best part anyway. One year, he made me a paper ornament with macaroni glued in the shape of a heart. It's still on my tree. I saw it that night, dangling from a low branch. I reached out and touched it. Rough. Fragile. A little bent. Just like me. I thought about the years after he got married. The first Christmas, they said they were going to Olivia's parents. I smiled and said it was fine. Of course it was. That's how it goes, right? The next year, they promised they'd stop by. But they showed up 2 hours late, full from lunch. Barely touched my food. Left before dessert. Still, I smiled. Still, I cooked. Still, I waited. Because that's what mothers do. We keep believing. Keep baking. Keep setting the table, even when the chairs stay empty. But that night, something in me cracked. Not in a dramatic way. No yelling. No slammed doors. Just a quiet shift. A truth settling in my chest like a stone dropped in a pond. I wasn't forgotten. I was excluded. And there's a difference. The day after Christmas, I didn't get out of bed until almost 10. The tree lights were still on. I'd left them that way the night before, too tired or too numb to pull the plug. The ornaments glowed faintly in the morning light, casting quiet little shadows on the living room walls. The snowman David made hung low on the side, slightly tilted. I hadn't fixed it. I don't know why. The air in the house had changed. Not cold, exactly. Just blank. The way a room feels after guests leave, only this time, no one had come. I made a single cup of coffee. No breakfast. I didn't bother sweeping the kitchen. The foil-covered casserole dishes in the fridge sat untouched. I couldn't bring myself to open them. It felt like I'd be admitting something if I did. Like signing a receipt for what had happened. Instead, I sat at the table. Not to eat. Just to sit. The sun was barely coming in through the window. Pale. Weak. I wrapped the robe tighter around myself and looked across at the chair where John used to sit. That's when it started. The looping. The questions. Did I talk about him too much? Did I make the house feel heavy? Maybe Olivia didn't like that I still used his mug. The one with the faded fishing boat and the chipped rim. Maybe it bothered her that I kept his robe on the hook by the door or that I still watched the same holiday movies every year. Maybe I made them feel like they were visiting a museum instead of a home. I thought about last year. They arrived 2 hours late. Olivia said traffic was bad. David said they were wiped from lunch at her mother's. They both picked at the food, said everything tasted amazing, but barely ate. They left before dessert. I remember standing at the sink after they pulled out of the driveway, washing 3 nearly clean plates, wondering if I was the one who had made it all feel wrong. The year before that, they didn't come at all. Sent a text Christmas morning, hope you're having a cozy one. Love you. That was it. I told myself it was okay. They were busy. Newlyweds. Juggling 2 families. I even replied, have a wonderful time, with a little tree emoji, pretending I wasn't sitting by the window in a dress I hadn't worn in 5 years. I thought back to the first Christmas after they got engaged. Olivia wanted to host. Just something small, she said, More modern. I offered to bring my stuffing. She said they were doing something different, quinoa and roasted vegetables. I made my stuffing anyway. Ate it alone. It's strange what you remember when you're trying to figure out when things changed. The way David used to sit on the counter while I baked. The way he'd lick the frosting off the spatula before I could stop him. The way he always insisted on reading the Christmas story out loud, even when his voice cracked during puberty. The way he once made me a thank you card in crayon for making green beans just the way he liked them. And now? He barely called. When they did come, it felt like they were scanning the room for the exit. Olivia stayed glued to her phone. David would fidget, waiting for her signal to wrap things up. Maybe I said the wrong things. Brought up the past too often. Talked too much about how we used to do it or John always liked it this way. Maybe I made them feel like I was stuck, and they were being dragged into it. I looked around the room. Everything was exactly how I left it. Candle wax hardened into little puddles on the table. A half-used napkin still tucked under a plate. The good dishes, waiting to be washed. I stood slowly, my knees creaking the way they do now, and carried one plate to the sink. Then another. Then the last. I didn't rush. Each step felt heavier than the last. The water ran warm. Steam rose. I dipped the sponge into the bubbles and scrubbed. Not the dishes. Myself. Scrubbed through the moments I might have made too big. Scrubbed through the words I should have swallowed. Scrubbed through every story about John the First might have told one too many times. I rinsed the plate and watched the soap slide down the porcelain like it could take the guilt with it. And then I stopped. Hands wet. Heart pounding. Because maybe, just maybe, it wasn't all my fault. Maybe I hadn't done anything wrong. Maybe I just reminded them of something they didn't want to carry. Grief. Tradition. Family in a form that didn't fit their new version of life. And maybe that was enough for them to start stepping back. Quietly. Kindly. But steadily. I wiped my hands and stood in the silence of the kitchen. The fridge clicked on behind me. A soft hum. The radiator popped once in the corner. Outside, snow had started to fall. Light flakes, barely sticking. I walked to the window and watched it for a while. The way the world gets still when the first snow hits. The way everything slows down, like even time holds its breath. And standing there, I whispered something I hadn't let myself think until that moment. Maybe I wasn't too much. Maybe they just wanted less. The morning after Christmas, I woke up before the sun. Not because I wanted to. I just couldn't stay asleep. My body was tired, but something in me kept pacing, even while I lay still. The house was dark. Not pitch black. Just that grayish kind of dark, the kind where the light from the tree glows like a memory. I didn't turn on the lamps. I didn't even change out of my robe. I just stood at the back door for a while, holding my coffee, watching the yard breathe under a thin coat of frost. The grass sparkled, stiff and white. The maple tree, John's tree, was bare now, its limbs stretched out like they were waiting for something too. It was cold enough to sting, but not so cold that I stayed inside. I slipped on my boots, pulled my sweater tighter, and stepped out onto the porch. The wind bit my cheeks as I walked. The ground crunched under my steps, and I could hear the slow creak of the gate when I opened it. It wasn't much of a yard anymore. Just some raised beds we never replanted. A bench that needed sanding. And that old wooden bird feeder hanging from the post near the tree. John used to refill it every Saturday morning. Like clockwork. Even when he could barely make it down the steps without coughing, he still insisted on filling it. Said the birds needed someone to remember them in winter. I hadn't touched it since he passed. But something pulled me toward it that morning. Not a sound. Not a thought. Just a strange feeling. Like someone tapping gently on your shoulder. When I got closer, I saw it. Tucked between the roof of the feeder and the wooden post, there was an envelope. Weathered at the edges, a little dusty. It didn't belong there. At first, I thought maybe a neighbor's mail had blown over. But when I reached for it, I froze. It had my name on it. Just Mary. Not Mom. Not Mrs. Dalton. Just Mary. In John's handwriting. My knees went soft. I had to steady myself on the post. I turned the envelope over. There was a date written in the corner. Almost a year ago. A week before he died. I held it for a long time before opening it. My fingers couldn't quite believe what they were doing. The flap tore gently. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. His writing. Slanted, neat, shaky in spots, but still unmistakably his. No greeting. No, dear Mary. He never bothered with formalities when he had something serious to say. Just this. If you're reading this, something's happened I hoped wouldn't. Go to my desk. Top drawer. There's more. That was it. I read it 3 times, as if more words might appear. They didn't. Back inside, I didn't bother taking off my boots. I walked straight to the small study at the end of the hall. The door creaked when I opened it. The air inside smelled faintly of old wood and graphite. His desk sat exactly the way he left it. Neatly aligned pens. Calculator on the left. A pad of yellow paper with half-solved numbers scribbled in the margins. I opened the top drawer slowly. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed the envelope. Taped under the drawer, against the inside panel. Hidden. It was thicker than the one I'd found outside. Folded tightly. A paperclip held a small gold key. My breath caught. I slid it out carefully and sat down in his chair. The envelope had no name, no label. Just weight. Inside was a folded note. I read it first. Mary. If David ever shuts you out, this will make sense. You'll find everything you need at the place this key opens. It's yours. Always was. You just didn't know it. My hand went to my chest. I didn't understand. Not yet. I turned the note over, but that was all he wrote. I picked up the key. Small. Brass. Smooth from years of use. It felt warm in my hand, even though the room was cold. And then I saw the second paper. Folded neatly behind the note. A deed. With my name on it. I read the address twice. A place in Hood River. 45 minutes away. I didn't recognize the street. Didn't remember John ever mentioning another property. We lived in one house our whole marriage. One mortgage. One address. That's what I believed. I grabbed my phone and typed the address into the map. A red pin appeared. No photos. No business listing. Just a quiet little road in the hills. I sat back in the chair and stared at the key. He had planned this. Not out of fear. Not out of control. But something else. Something gentler, maybe. Protection. A backup life, waiting quietly, just in case the one I thought I had started to crumble. The radiator hissed once behind me. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. My hands trembled. And in that moment, a truth louder than silence echoed through me. He saw it coming. He didn't warn me. He prepared me. I left just after sunrise. The sky was still soft, the kind of gray that makes everything look like it's been dipped in silence. I packed a small overnight bag, just enough. A sweater, extra socks, my toothbrush. The key John left sat in the side pocket. It felt heavier than it should have. The drive took just under an hour. Past the edge of Bend, toward Hood River. The roads were clear but slick in some patches. I passed frosted fields, quiet barns, and a gas station I didn't recognize. I kept the radio off. I didn't need music. I needed to hear my own breathing. The address led me off the main road, past a hardware store with a hand-painted sign and onto a gravel path with no marker. I slowed the car. Checked the number again. It matched. Still, I hesitated. At the end of the path stood a small white farmhouse with blue shutters. A porch with stone steps. Nothing flashy. But not neglected either. It looked steady. Like it had been waiting. I turned off the engine and sat for a second. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than I meant them to. The heater hummed softly. I reached for the key and stepped outside. The porch creaked under my boots. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the bare branches of the oak tree in the yard. I took a deep breath, slid the key into the lock, and turned. It clicked. When I pushed the door open, a warmth greeted me. Not heat. Something deeper. Familiar. The first thing I saw was the wooden bench by the entryway. The same style John had built for our first house. Next to it, a row of boots lined up neatly, one pair I recognized. His. Mud still caked on the soles. A coat hung on the hook, faded green with a tear near the cuff. My throat tightened. I took a few steps in. The living room opened up slowly, like a memory unfolding. There was a small fireplace, mantel decorated with simple pine garland. On it, framed photos. Not new ones. Old ones. One of me and John on the beach in '85. One from our 35th anniversary, blurry but beautiful. And one I had never seen. John. Sitting on that very porch. A coffee mug in hand. Looking off into the trees. The furniture was mismatched in that cozy, lived-in way. A quilt I had stitched years ago draped over the couch. The lamp on the end table had a water stain on the shade. I remembered the accident that caused it. I turned slowly, taking it all in. The kitchen was through a narrow archway. Wood cabinets. A small round table in the corner with 2 placemats set. No dust. No mess. Just ready. I opened the pantry. Canned goods. Flour. Rice. Coffee. Everything dated within the last 6 months. There was a grocery list taped to the inside of the cabinet door. Written in John's handwriting. Bread. Eggs. Tea. Batteries. Toothpaste. Cookies, if on sale. I laughed. A sound I didn't expect. It escaped without permission. Then I cried. Just as suddenly. Not because I was sad. Because I understood. He had built this. Not as a secret. Not as a getaway. But as a safety net. In case the world I knew started to fall out from under me. In case they forgot me. In case they stopped seeing me as someone who mattered. He saw it before I did. I walked down the short hallway. 2 bedrooms. One made up neatly, a crocheted blanket folded at the edge. A reading lamp on the nightstand. A small stack of books, mysteries I'd passed over to him over the years. The other room held boxes. Labeled in John's handwriting. Mary's craft bin. Extra linens. Winter scarves. He had packed parts of my life here. Tucked them away before I knew I'd need them. I sat down on the edge of the bed in the made-up room. The air smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish. I closed my eyes and breathed in slow. I wasn't just stepping into a house. I was stepping into a version of my life. One untouched by excuses or absences. One where I was still loved. Still seen. Still known. I opened the drawer beside the bed. Inside was a folded note. Just one line. This is yours in case they ever forget who you are. John. I sat there a long time, holding that paper like it might dissolve if I blinked too hard. He didn't just leave me a house. He left me a version of us, untouched by their absence. The call came 2 days after I found the house. I was back home in Bend. The little farmhouse sat locked and quiet again, but something in me stayed there, still seated on that bed with John's note in my hand. I was folding towels when the phone rang. Landline. No caller ID. I almost didn't answer. Mrs. Dalton, a man's voice said. This is Richard Eldon. I used to manage your husband's trust accounts. I hadn't spoken to Richard since the funeral. He was kind. Polite in that way financial men are, with starched collars and slow speech. Apologies for calling out of the blue, he said. I've been going through the final updates on John's estate. There's something I believe you should see. Privately. I agreed to meet him the next morning. His office sat above a bakery downtown, tucked between a gift shop and a closed-down hardware store. I wore John's green coat. Still couldn't find my own. The stairs creaked under me. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted up from below. My stomach growled, though I hadn't been hungry in days. Richard stood when I walked in. Hair grayer than I remembered. His office hadn't changed. Still lined with framed certificates and family photos on the windowsill. 2 grandkids, a golden retriever, a wife who taught 2nd grade. He offered coffee. I declined. I won't take much of your time, he said, sliding a folder toward me. John set up a separate fund 3 years ago. In your name. Transfer protected. Non-discretionary. Meaning only you can access it. No one else knew about it. Not even your son. I opened the folder. Bank statements. Account summaries. My name printed clearly across the top. I believe he intended this as a safety net, Richard continued. A private cushion. In case, well, things changed. I didn't say anything. Just stared at the numbers. More than I'd expected. More than John ever told me we had. There's more, he added, sliding another document toward me. This is from 2 years ago. A request for a withdrawal from one of the other accounts. A large one. Denied. My eyes scanned the page. Requester, Michael Dalton. My son. The same son who hadn't called on Christmas. There were others. Smaller requests. Each one time-stamped. Each denied. Then one final page. A wire authorization. Signed. But not by me. The signature looked familiar. Too familiar. I reached into my purse and pulled out my ID. Placed it beside the page. Same loops. Same slant. But I hadn't signed it. He tried to use your name, Richard said quietly. But John caught it. Locked everything down after that. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. The idea of my own son forging my name, faking my permission to take something that wasn't his, it knocked the breath from my chest. We didn't file charges, Richard added. John didn't want it to go that far. He said, he hoped it was a moment of panic. Not a pattern. But it was a pattern. Now I could see it clearly. The distance. The cold dinners. The silence after holidays. The sudden warmth when things were needed. The quick withdrawal when they weren't. They were making plans. And I wasn't in them. I stood slowly, folding the papers back into the folder. Thank you, I said. My voice didn't shake. It surprised me how calm I sounded. He nodded. There's a lot more in there. Notes. Instructions. John was thorough. I stepped back into the hallway. The bakery smell hit me harder this time. Warm sugar, vanilla, the sharp scent of nutmeg. I gripped the folder tighter. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table. The one that still had a faint red wax stain from Christmas. I read through every page. Slowly. John had built a quiet fortress. He saw what I couldn't. Or maybe what I refused to. They didn't just forget me. They had tried to rewrite me. My name on documents I never touched. My identity used as leverage for something I never agreed to. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair. The heater clicked on in the corner. The fridge hummed low. Outside, the wind tapped against the kitchen window like a warning I'd been too proud to hear. And in that moment, I saw it all. Not a misunderstanding. Not a distance. A strategy. A realignment of their lives. One where I was no longer central. I wasn't part of their future. I was an obstacle in their plans. I heard the knock at 11:07. Not a heavy knock. Not rushed. Just two soft taps, like someone hoping to be invited but not brave enough to demand it. I was in the kitchen, folding dish towels that didn't need folding, half listening to the kettle start its slow hiss. Outside, the sky was heavy again. Oregon winter gray. Not raining. Not snowing. Just still. I moved to the door and peeked through the small glass pane. David. He hadn't changed much. Same brown coat. Same slouch. But something about the way he stood was different. Like his shoes didn't belong to the ground anymore. Like he was floating just above consequence. And behind him, in the driveway, Olivia sat in the passenger seat. Windows up. Hands in her lap. Eyes down. She didn't wave. I opened the door but didn't step aside. Hey, Mom, he said. His voice was soft. Practiced. I waited. I thought I'd stop by. Just to talk. You got a minute? I studied his face. The line between his brows. The way he tilted his head, slightly, when he wanted to seem gentle. He used to do that as a teenager when he came home late and needed to explain why curfew didn't count that night. I stepped aside. Not wide. Just enough. He walked in, glancing around like he didn't remember where things belonged. Like the house had rearranged itself without him. The smell of cedar and old coffee hung in the air. The heater hummed low from the hallway. I said nothing. He sat down at the kitchen table like it was neutral ground. I stayed standing. I know it's been weird, he began. The holidays and everything. It's just been a lot. I nodded once. Not to agree. Just to let him know I was listening. He smiled. That half smile he used when he didn't know what would work yet. Liv's been worried about you, he said. We both have. I looked out the window toward the car. Olivia didn't move. I turned back to him. Why did you come here, David? He shifted in his seat. There's this thing coming up, he said. A business deal. I don't want to bore you with the details, but it's promising. Real estate. I've been learning a lot. But we're a little tight right now, with the baby and everything. He paused. You could help. Just a short-term loan. That's when I knew. He hadn't come to check on me. He had come to see if I still had anything left to take. I pulled out the folder from under the sideboard. The one from Richard's office. Placed it on the table. He didn't touch it. You tried to forge my name, I said. Calm. Clear. You stole from your father's account. You lied. He looked down at his hands. Then back up. Mom. I raised a finger. No. Let me speak now. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. You stopped showing up before he died. You made excuses. You blamed Olivia's family. But it wasn't about time. It was about convenience. You came when it was easy. You left when it wasn't. I didn't mean to. But you did. He looked away. Toward the sink. Toward the photo of John and me on the wall. Dad never said anything, he murmured. No, I said. Because he hoped you'd come back on your own. But he prepared for the moment you wouldn't. The silence stretched. I looked at my son. Really looked. And in that moment, I saw something I had never allowed myself to see before. His eyes no longer held John's steadiness. That quiet conviction. That loyal softness. They held calculation. And hunger. Not evil. Not cruel. Just empty. He stood, suddenly nervous. I shouldn't have come. I didn't answer. I just thought. I know what you thought. He looked back one more time, as if waiting for me to crack, to offer tea, to say the thing that would reset us. But I stayed still. He turned. Walked to the door. Hesitated at the handle. I waited for an apology. A real one. It never came. I watched him walk back to the car. Olivia didn't look up. He opened her door. She slid over to the driver's seat. He got in. They drove away. No wave. No goodbye. Just distance, solidified. I stood in the quiet of the kitchen, surrounded by folded towels and cold tea. And I breathed. For the first time, the call from Susan came just before dinner. I was slicing an apple at the counter. Nothing fancy. Just one of those red Honeycrisps, crisp and cold from the fridge. The kind John used to like with peanut butter. Susan didn't start with a hello. Mary, she said, I just got back from the pharmacy. You'll want to sit down for this. I didn't sit. I just waited. It's Whitney, she said. She's been talking to people. Quietly, but it's spreading. Said you've been confused. That you forgot to pay a bill. That you left the burner on. She said someone should be keeping an eye on you. I let the knife rest on the cutting board. My voice stayed steady. She said that? She said you might not be fit to manage things on your own. I breathed in through my nose, slow and sharp. Whitney is Olivia's sister. Lives 2 blocks away. Always had a way of pretending to care while sharpening her nails. Susan hesitated. I think they're trying to build a case. My knees wanted to give, but I stayed standing. I thanked Susan. Said I'd call her later. Then I hung up. The kitchen felt colder suddenly. Not in temperature. In spirit. Like someone had left a window open to winter. I walked to the sink and turned on the water. Watched it run. I thought about all the times I'd doubted myself lately. Misplaced my keys. Forgot the name of the neighbor's cat. Stared at the stove too long trying to remember if I'd turned it off. But that wasn't madness. That was grief. And grief is not incompetence. I dried my hands and went to the study. Pulled out the folder again. John hadn't just protected me financially. He had given me records. Logs. Statements. Dates. Copies of every communication between him and David in those last 2 years. He knew the storm would come. And he left me the umbrella. I picked up the phone and called Dr. Kessler's office. My primary physician. 2 days later, I sat across from her in a pale green exam room, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. I'd like a cognitive assessment, I told her. She looked up from her clipboard, curious. Any recent symptoms? No, I said. I just want it in writing. We did the tests. Memory, attention, judgment, verbal recall. I answered every question clearly. I looked her in the eye. When we were done, she nodded slowly. You're sharper than half the nurses here, she said with a small smile. You sure you don't want to join the team? I laughed. And I didn't cry. Back home, I made copies of the results. I contacted a lawyer Susan recommended. A woman named Renee with a calm voice and a spine of steel. She drafted a formal notice of capacity. Legal. Notarized. We sent copies to David and Olivia. And to Whitney. I never received a reply. But I heard the silence. It was a different kind than before. Before, the silence came from disinterest. From absence. Now, it came from caution. Because they knew I had taken the microphone back. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't knocking over tables. I was documenting. I was stating. I was showing up to my own life, paper in hand. I cleaned out the pantry that week. Threw away expired cans. Reorganized the spices. Labeled the shelves. I even replaced the smoke alarm batteries. Twice. Every move I made felt like a declaration. Not to them. To me. That I was still here. That I could still make decisions. Count pills. Pay bills. Read legalese. And most of all, that I knew exactly what had been happening. Not a misunderstanding. Not poor communication. An erasure. Methodical. Quiet. And nearly complete. But not anymore. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the light stretch long across the floorboards. The heater kicked on in the hallway, and somewhere outside, a dog barked once. I placed the certified copy of my assessment into John's old lockbox. Next to our wedding license. Next to the deed to the house in Hood River. And for the first time in weeks, I exhaled all the way to the bottom. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about reclaiming what they tried to take. It was about clarity. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that moves quietly and changes everything. I didn't lose my mind. I reclaimed it. It started with a list. Not a long one. Just a piece of notepaper I tore from the pad next to the phone. I wrote down the names slowly, not based on obligation or guilt, but on something simpler. Joy. People who had shown up when they didn't have to. Who dropped off soup when I had a cold. Who helped carry groceries without asking. Who didn't flinch when I talked about John in the present tense. Susan, of course. Gloria, from the quilting group. Nina, the teenager from across the street who liked to sketch birds and asked me to look at her art every Sunday after church. And Miss Lynn from the library, who always tucked in an extra bookmark with a joke on it. I stopped after 8 names. It felt right. Not too many. Not too few. Enough for a table to feel full again. I spent the next 2 days pulling dishes down from the high shelves. Not the fancy ones this time. Just the ones that made food taste like it had a story. I cleaned out the pantry. Rewrote the shopping list in pen. I didn't make ham this year. I made roasted chicken with garlic and lemon. Fresh green beans tossed with almonds. Mashed potatoes whipped just the way John liked, only this time, I didn't save the biggest scoop for a plate that would stay untouched. I made peach cobbler instead of pecan pie. Because I wanted to. Because the smell of cinnamon and butter and vanilla filled the kitchen in a way that made me feel like something new was baking inside me, too. The day before the dinner, I pulled out the tablecloth with the little frayed edge. The one Olivia once called too busy. I pressed it anyway. Set the table without waiting for a reply text. Lit candles that didn't have to mean anything but light. And on the day of, they came. One by one. Carrying covered dishes, scarves tugged tight, cheeks pink from the cold. Gloria brought her husband and his accordion. He only knew 4 songs, but played each one with a kind of joy that made the room feel like it was breathing. Nina brought sugar cookies shaped like stars, each one painted with tiny brush strokes. She handed me a drawing, folded in half. A robin perched on a windowsill. It reminded me of your backyard, she said. Susan arrived last, with a bottle of sparkling cider and her signature green bean casserole. She kissed my cheek and whispered, "Look at this table, Mary. Just look at it." And I did. There were crumbs already. Laughter echoing off the walls. Someone had spilled a little cider near the gravy boat, and no one rushed to clean it. We were too busy passing rolls and retelling the punchline to a joke that had lost its shape halfway through. I sat back, my napkin crumpled in my lap, and watched as every seat filled. Not out of tradition. Not out of duty. But choice. And I realized something. I had spent years thinking that love was waiting at the window. Setting plates for people who might not show. Hoping their absence wasn't a message. But love doesn't always knock at your front door. Sometimes, it sneaks in the back with a warm casserole and no questions. Sometimes, it sits beside you and doesn't need an apology. And sometimes, it starts again at 72, with mismatched chairs and a table full of voices you didn't expect to become your own. As the sun dipped below the windows, casting gold across the floor, I noticed the photo on the mantel. John and me. Our first Christmas. He had a bow taped to his forehead. I was laughing. The picture was crooked. I left it that way. Someone handed me another cookie. Someone else turned on the old jazz station. The room wasn't quiet anymore. And I wasn't waiting anymore. Last year I waited for them to show up. This year, I showed up for myself. The snow came late this year. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the grass was still greenish-brown, soft underfoot, with only the suggestion of winter in the breeze. But the air smelled like pine, and the living room glowed golden, full of people and casserole dishes and off-key humming. Inside, Gloria was leading a game of charades with Nina and the twins from next door. Someone had spilled cranberry sauce on the rug. No one cared. Susan had brought 3 pies instead of 1, and I had already cut into all of them. Just to be fair. But I wasn't in the kitchen. Not in the center. I was on the porch, wrapped in John's old flannel, a glass of wine in one hand and my other hand resting on the railing. The house behind me pulsed with laughter and fork clinks. It sounded like a living thing. Like a second heart. I sipped slowly. My breath fogged in the air, soft and steady. I wasn't cold. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about who hadn't come. The mailbox had held 1 card this year with David's handwriting. No, Mom. Just, Mary. Inside, a simple message. Hope the holidays are restful. All the best. David and Olivia. No apology. No phone call. No mention of last year or the visit or the forged signature. Just a single thin line drawn under the past like it was a document to be filed. I had read it once. Folded it neatly. And tucked it into the drawer beneath the bread box. Not out of anger. But because I didn't need to reread it again. Some goodbyes are quiet. Some endings have no ceremony. Just the slow rewiring of your own story without waiting for their edits. Inside the house, someone turned on the record player. A jazz album I hadn't heard in years. Nina's laugh spilled into the hallway. I watched the reflection in the window. So many faces. All different. All glowing in the amber light. And mine among them. Not behind the stove. Not at the far end of a too long table with 2 empty chairs. But part of it. Present. Included. I thought about last year. Setting the table for 3. Hoping 2 would show. Warming the ham just a little longer. Lighting candles that never got to flicker in anyone's gaze but my own. I thought about the silence after the knock that never came. And now? Now I didn't listen for knocks. I opened the door long before they arrived. Not for the ones I used to chase. But for the ones who showed up quietly. Steadily. With soup. With art. With patience. It's funny how grief taught me to listen better. To hear what wasn't said. And to say the things I never thought I'd have to. Like no. Like enough. Like, I matter too. I heard the screen door creak open. Susan stepped out, pie plate in hand, a smudge of whipped cream on her chin. Too loud in there, she asked. No, I said, smiling. Just loud enough. She nudged me gently. You did this, you know. What? This table. This house. These people. You chose it. I looked inside again. She was right. I didn't stumble into this life. I built it. Plank by plank. Invitation by invitation. After each silence, I added a song. After each absence, a new name. Not to replace, but to continue. I drained the last sip of wine and watched the stars begin to blink awake above the hills. Somewhere far away, someone else was probably setting a table I used to wish for. But I no longer sat in that wish. I sat here. In the warmth I made for myself. In the home that was no longer a museum of what was, but a celebration of what is. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, listening to the voices behind me. No apologies. No expectations. Just presence. Real. Tangled. Alive. They chose another table. So I built my own. And this one is full.